All
Well,
right.
welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. I think I'm here with two people, Marc Liotti and Marc Vigliotti, and he's joining us from Connecticut. Marc is a friend of mine here in Del Mar, California, Michael McCafferty, and that's how we came across one another. And I wanted to give a shout out to Mr. McCafferty because he's the one that said, "Hey, Greg, you need to meet Marc Liotti, Marc Vigliotti." uh, Good morning to you. Good day to you. I know here it's early in San Diego, but for you, not so. How are things going today?
All right. It's a beautiful day here in Ridgefield, Connecticut, about a mile from the New York state line. And I can't quite call myself a Connecticut Yankee, and still maintaining that New York presence. So, but happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, Marc. And I think the important part for our listeners is that you are an adventurer. He does a podcast show called All Across America. And I'm going to tell the listeners a little bit about you. He's a pretty fascinating guy. And I told him before we came on here, if our listeners learn about his show, but at the same time, learn about what it's like to kind of be a little bit more curious in life. I think that's an important element of personal growth. It's probably one of the first because curiosity then leads to a passion, which then leads to a purpose, which then leads to goals, which then leads to something happening positively. And I think focus is always a challenge for people that are curious because we like to do a lot of different things, right, Marc? So, so the focus part is the key, and the curiosity is to find something you're really passionate about. And I think Marc is very passionate. He's a fundraiser over the last 15 years, visited one-on-one with philanthropists across the country, with regular visits to California, Florida, New York, Texas. He's met with everyone from Academy Award winners to cat ladies. He calls it all wonderful people. The cat ladies were more generous, he said. He was the face of Rutgers University on the West Coast and held similar roles with the national environmental and humanitarian groups.
Yes.
We'll get into that. Marc is a West Point dropout. That's good. He's proud of that, actually. And a state school grad. He's hiked the 2,190 miles of the Appalachian Trail and restored the house that he's living in right now, a 1750s homestead where he lives with his family. He's lived in the Deep South, Appalachian, Pacific Northwest, New York, and New England. So you can see he's gotten around during his short lifespan so far.
Right, right. I'll make one interjection, Greg, for my folks listening, your listeners in Appalachia. It is properly pronounced Appalachia.
Oh, okay.
That's always a great debate. But I was a student.
For our green necks here in California, we'd probably say Appalachia, or however we probably mispronounce it. But I'm glad that you corrected me. He constantly seeks opportunities to learn from people with expertise, backgrounds, opinions from different from his own, which his Across America show does that. He works as a fundraiser with his radio DJ background in a conversational flow from forgotten and family corners of the country. Well, he is a very, very interesting man, to say the least. And, Marc, tell us, I think, when you do a Charles Kuralt kind of show, which is, I'm just going to use his name.
Yes.
I think if you had a motorhome and you could literally go across the United States or an old pickup truck, you'd probably do that.
That's right.
What was the inspiration behind All Across America, and how'd you get started with this podcast show?
Okay. Well, you mentioned my career as a fundraiser, and I've worked as what's called a frontline or a face-to-face fundraiser for almost 20 years, and it's a wonderful, wonderful occupation that I'm glad not too many people know about, because there'd be people clamoring to do the work that I do. And a lot of people think of fundraising as, I don't know, a bake sale or an auction or events, or I don't know, getting a telemarketing phone call from your college, but The work that I do is meeting, as you mentioned, Greg, one-on-one with folks all across the country. And I've literally met with donors from San Diego to Miami, from Boston to San Francisco, and had a chance to sit down with people and really hear about their lives. And these are wonderful folks who are charitable, who support causes that are dear to them, whether that's scholarships for first-generation college students, or giving to support the environment, or humanitarian causes across the world. And the pandemic hit, and I didn't get a chance to do that as much. And I've always enjoyed just meeting people and having that sense of curiosity. And I don't quite know where it comes from, but I miss that. And it also brings me to something called, I don't know if you're familiar with the centenarian clusters, which are folks who have lived over 100 years. And there's a few of them, one closer to you in Loma Linda, California, Seventh-day Adventist group, Okinawa, Japan, and then Sardinia, Italy. And I spent a lot of time in Sardinia, Italy. It's the second largest island in the Mediterranean, outside of Sicily.
It's funny you say that, because Dan Buettner was just on here, the guy that writes the Blue Zones.
Exactly.
And he was on a few months ago.
Exactly.
And that lady in Redlands, well, actually it's where the Seventh-day Adventists are. I think she's 108 now.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
And yes, Dan Buettner, that's his research, and it's longitudinal research over decades. And there have been empirical studies and mixed messages, let's say, around wine consumption. And years ago, it said, a couple glasses of wine a day is good for you. And recently, some of that studies have shown that it doesn't have any effect. But in looking at these centenarian clusters, it's almost reverse engineering what somebody should do to live long. And one of the things that the centenarian clusters have is a sense of community. So they're close to their family and they're close to their friends. And on Okinawa, there's a concept called the Moawis, which is having a group of 5 friends who commit to each other for life. And, maintaining those friendships and those family ties are just so important to me. And quite frankly, it's a lot more fun than eating lots of beans and leafy greens. So, so that was kind of the impetus behind the show, was just that.
Well, so you're saying you're fundraising because of the pandemic. You weren't able to meet with these people in person, so you started doing the podcast show. I think that's a wonderful impetus to actually start something like this, to be honest with you.
Thank you.
And I've done a lot of fundraising myself. I've worked for many different charities over the years, and they always put me in the fundraising role. Oh, we're doing this campaign. We got to raise $2 million to build this building. And I was the guy that always seemed to be in charge of that. And you do meet a lot of interesting people, and you have a lot of interesting discussions. But your podcast covers a wide range of topics, and related to American culture and history, and unusual people. You just made a comment about a guy in Dollywood that has been performing twice a night or something for
over 6 nights a week, in Dollywood and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. So
so how do you decide on what topics to explore and share with the audience? Is it really just you get a hunch and you go search something down and you find somebody and you put them on the show?
Pretty much. all of the folks that I've had on the show, I have some interest, whether it's, direct or tangentially. I when I was 13 years old, I learned how to juggle, and, I happened across Niels Dunker, who is, as I mentioned, 8-time Guinness World Record juggler, and had him on the show. And prior to that, I had a luxury matchmaker in Minneapolis, and prior to that, I had a bison rancher outside of Bozeman, Montana, that has a herd of 170 bison. And that happened to be a personal friend of mine that I had worked with in a previous job. But he's got a great story, and it's.
I think the interesting thing is, though, Mark, everybody has a story, right? We all do, and we've all got a history. and we've all got unique ways in which we fell upon kind of what we are doing or did or are
Right.
doing or are going to do. Um, what is it that intrigues you as an individual to profile these different stories in America? It's all across America, right?
Right.
You didn't say
Right.
all across Europe. You didn't go anywhere else. You pretty much stayed right here.
Yes.
Um, and I think that, when you look at what you're doing, I mentioned Charles Kuralt. I mean, that's kind of what he used to do for CBS, right? Was
Oh yeah.
across the country in a motorhome and find unusual stories,
Yeah.
right?
The car that runs on the corn cobs, the canoe maker, the Kentucky
But they're all
croquet.
human interest stories, and I think
Exactly.
that's the most important thing. And it's about this American culture. It's at the deep root underneath. There's
Yeah.
this underlying culture that every one of these kind of communities has, where you find somebody like that, where
Yeah.
it's happened. What is it, the unique aspects of the culture that you wanted to make the world aware of by interviewing these kind of people?
Yeah, it's such a huge country in terms of population, 330 million, and fourth largest country in the world by size. But also, it's the geography, and and traveling throughout Europe, people would make fun of Americans that only a small percentage of us had passports. And I would say to folks, you're right, but people need to understand the vastness of the United States. Even the vastness of New York State. And people think New York State is only New York City, whereas it's a huge state that can take 8 hours to go from one side of the other. And with that vast country and that hundreds of years of history and millions, hundreds of millions of people, there are so many different subcultures, and there's just so much to learn and to know about. And it's that soft power that it's spoken of in diplomatic terms that we have in the United States, whether that's basketball, whether that's music, popular culture, and there's just so much to explore. It's endless, it's boundless,
Well,
and
out of the podcasts you've done, Mark, which is the one that you would find most intriguing, interesting, and was a compelling story?
that's a tough
I hate to
call.
make you choose one, but I think we probably don't have time for a bunch of them. But I
Yeah,
think it gives our listeners a little idea of the in-depth nature in which you go when you do the podcast.
right.
But was there anybody that stood out to you that was like,
Yeah.
wow, this is really cool?
I think Susie Allport was I think the third person I interviewed. And Susie Allport wrote Sermons in Stone, the Stone Walls of New York and New England. And, I live on an old farmstead, and there are a lot of stone walls. And I spent a lot of the pandemic doing a 3D puzzle, which is putting together rock walls. So, I met with her, and she was the first person that I did in person. So I have, a whole interview kit, and sat down and recorded it live at her kitchen table. But not only was she an expert and still giving talks to this day on stone walls, but she's also written about omega-3s and the health benefits of omega-3s. And they're completely divergent subjects.
That's for
And
certain. Yeah,
and
that's
I said to her at the start of the interview, I said, it sounds like you write about what interests you, and
yeah.
and that was exactly it. And for me, it's we had half of a conversation on stone walls, and the other half of our conversation was on omega-3s. And
That is pretty interesting. And that's actually quite cool because I think
yeah,
that just shows the nature at which you don't know how people actually get where they are until you ask them the question
yes,
about that. And then they tell you this story about how she got involved with studying omega-3s and the interest in omega-3s and what it did for you and
right,
so on. And I think that's again around curiosity. When you look at all these people are highly curious about a lot of different things. And with so many different perspectives and experiences shared on your podcast, because there really is
yeah,
a rancher that you were just talking about, and you don't do them all in person. You don't have the opportunity to do that. You've got to probably do most of them via recording.
yes,
Um, have you noticed any common themes or connections between them? So what would you say might be a common theme that runs amongst these people that you've interviewed? Now, I know I've done 1,100, almost 1,100 interviews now, pretty close. That's a lot
Pioneer,
of interviews, right?
podcasting pioneer.
And but the point is if somebody asked me that question, I would probably say, and I don't want to sway your answer,
Okay.
but after you answer, I'm going to answer.
Okay. All right. I thought you'd go first. I would, it's about the passion that people have. And, for me, I was a radio DJ, and that brought that background in the melding of, the relationships and being a radio DJ and meeting with donors one-on-one. But it's about just understanding. And so for me, if you're a carpenter, you have to be interested in wood. If you're a car mechanic, hopefully you like cars. And it's just great hearing these folks and their passion for what they do. And the sometimes single-minded focus. Niels Dunker performed 6 nights a week in Dollywood on stage, wrote a book about a juggler, and is now attempting a Guinness Book of World Records, 14 rings. And when you have to throw these things so high in the air, I learned that there are very few indoor buildings that can accommodate,
Wow.
his world record holding. And so, I mean, I was so excited to hear about how enthralled he was about the subject of juggling, and it wasn't just a job.
Mhm. Well, so you answered the question, and I'll answer the question after all of these interviews that I've done. This show started with people who had a passion for a topic enough that they would write a book.
Right. Yeah.
98, 99% of the people that come on are authors, right?
Right.
And I have branched out a little bit lately with that kind of theme that I've got.
Right.
And I also narrowed it down when you talk about focus to spirituality, personal growth, business, and wellness. And people would say, "Oh, that's kind of a weird genres that you've kind of blended." And here's what I found out. If you looked at every one of those genres, and that was all by accident, Mark,
Right.
in each one of those, like the lady with the omega-3s, that was a thing around her wellness. You talked about that 5 minutes ago when you talked about the 108-year-old woman with the 7-day Adventists up
Yes.
in, I call it Redlands area, but it's close. That's a wellness thing. We talked about Dan Buettner. That's a wellness thing.
Exactly.
Other people had the passion around business, but then, as you know, as a professional fundraiser, I'm getting to the answer here. Those people were beyond the business to do something good for the world. So those kind of people, and almost, I'm going to say 60 to 70% of the people that I interview, they want to take the money they've earned and do good with it. They want to put it out and work. Like me, I have a nonprofit. You work for a nonprofit. I'm
Yes.
trying to help the homeless as much as I can, and the Ukrainian refugees from everybody that makes a donation. But the point is it's like, okay, what else is there? What's the bigger purpose here?
Right.
So what I found out about people that write a book is that they've got a passion about one or two or three different things. They want the world to know about it. So they're writing the book.
Yes.
The book, as most books are, they're door openers for people. I mean, there's only a small percentage of books that ever hit the top selling list, right?
Yes.
So when you write a book, you have to say, well, what are my odds of, being Harry Potter? Pretty kind of slim to nil. But on the other hand, it's a great way to hand it to somebody as a kind of a calling card and say, hey, here's how we can talk about the things that I'm passionate about. So the answer to the question is, I found that everybody that in those genres, spirituality in particular, they really had this unique interest in wanting to tell the world, like this one. This is a book I just bought. I don't have to buy very many of them, but this is Larry Dossey, One Mind,
Okay.
right? And this is an old book, but it's how our individual mind is part of a greater consciousness and why it matters. And this is an MD writing. And these are the kind of people that I'm really enthralled with, because these people have gone through medical school and now they've gone beyond science, right? They're looking to spirituality, right?
Right.
So and there's so many of them now. They're like crawling out of the woodworks wanting to be on the show, right? So it's very cool. I love it. So hopefully I answered the question for you and for the listeners. I'm intrigued by people who have a focus, who want to get their message out and are very passionate about it. And that's how they get on the podcast. Now, how much have you traveled to actually get to some of these guests? And I know you said you took your kit and went out and met with this lady in her kitchen and did the
Right.
podcast. Do you do much of that, or is this really
Yes.
mostly? And if you do, what makes it different for you to actually sit face to face versus me, which is, I got to admit, 90% of the people that are on the show, I never meet them face to face first.
Right. Yeah.
I don't have that opportunity.
Right. It's been mostly in the, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. I've met with folks face to face just because it's easier to travel. And yeah, ideally one day when I retire, I'll, get that RV and, travel to the forgotten corners of the country. But, until then, I kind of keep it local. And but it's kind of cool to show up to somebody's doorstep and, you've got everything you need in a little backpack and, you set it up. And I think folks have
And
become
are
very.
you doing those just audio?
Yes, usually those I do audio. I
Okay.
can do video with, setting up an iPhone,
Sure,
but
you
I've
could.
generally done
You
mostly
don't. You
with audio.
with
Yeah.
audio. Well, for people out there that want to start a podcast show, I know you're just now starting your journey. I'd say starting it in the sense that, if I look at the numbers of podcasts, quantity
Embryonic.
is not always quality, but
Yes.
I say people really think that the quality of inside personal growth is there. So I keep doing it.
Yes.
What is it about you, this podcasting, in your estimation, that you would tell other people that are maybe on the cusp of
Okay.
wanting to do podcasts? Because it isn't, nobody's asked me this question, but the point is I'm getting it from somebody who's relatively new at it
Right.
and understands that it isn't as easy as it looks.
No. No. I would say, with any hobby or pursuit, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And you've just got to, if it's something that you want to do, get it started. Get into it and don't spend too much money at first. And I think a lot of people get into, they pursue something, some sort of passion, they buy all the fancy equipment and they spend all their time researching and buying equipment, and it may fizzle out, or they may decide that that's not the direction that they were going to take it, and they go in a slightly different direction and need, a different set of equipment. For me, I did everything myself. I designed the website, I played the theme music on slide guitar and recorded it. The logo I created myself. And so if you can get some outside help, do that. But if it's something and you've got a topic that you feel that people would be interested in hearing about, pursue it. But it's not, as you know, in terms of, conversational approach and meeting with people, I think that's one of the harder parts. And, there are a lot of different styles of podcasts. Some are just, two people, talking to each other, making jokes. Others are more like yours, which is, and mine, which are more interview and conversational approaches to folks we find of interest. But get a better estimation of who you are as a person, and do you have that quality of bringing out folks that speak from the heart. And for
Well,
me,
you've got this Nellis, is it Niels Duinker, Pigeon
yes,
Forge,
Niels
Tennessee?
Duinker. Yeah.
that's the world record holder for doing all the juggling, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd encourage people to take a look at that one. He's a very young guy.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
see. And um, you say as your tagline, podcasting from Portland East to Portland West, from Big Pine Key to Pacific Beach, from San Juan to Guam. It is all across America, but as soon as you put this out here, that you have an international market, because all they have to do is go acrossamerica.net. And that is the site, people. It's
Yeah.
allacrossamerica.net. I'd
Cool.
welcome you to go there. You can see the
Please.
podcast. You obviously can get it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and YouTube, but that is his website that you want to go to do that. And what are some upcoming podcasts that you have scheduled that our listeners might want to know about with relation to maybe something really unique that you've got scheduled that's on the drawing board?
I mentioned the last three that I had, which was the bison rancher, matchmaker, the juggler, looking to have a mentalist on. So we'll see if that works. And that is the mental magic. Then I also have somebody a little bit closer to home. I did Greg Pittman, who is Mr. Florida, and has written half dozen books on the state of Florida. So I said, I should have somebody closer to home. So I've got somebody in a similar vein for the state of Connecticut, my home state, who does pop culture. Would love to have the Texanist on, who writes a monthly column in Texas Monthly, who would be Craig Pittman's and Mike Allen, who is the Connecticut pop culture person. That would be their counterpart. So those are a few things coming up. But if anybody has suggestions, please let me
Right.
know.
Yeah,
Reach out.
right, Mark. You can reach out to him through the website and give him your suggestions. Just it's the contact. You can have
Right.
the about and the support us, and obviously he's doing this all on his own nickel, so he could use the support to keep it going. The other thing is that you know much of your time is focused on fundraising.
Yes.
Speak with our listening audience about who you're working with right now and associated with, and the fundraising that you're doing and the cause that you're working for.
Okay. As I mentioned, I've worked for a couple of universities, NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council, which is an environmental group based in New York City, which works on policy and advocacy. And I've been in the humanitarian sector for the last few years, and I work specifically with legacy giving. And those are folks that are interested in leaving a cause in their will.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of higher net worth people that are capable of making larger outright gifts today. But we talk about the millionaire next door, who could be, one of your listeners that, lives in a home that is really accrued in value over the last couple of decades, may not have children. And in making that ultimate gift at their end of their life could be a very large and significant gift to organizations they support, whether
Mhm.
that's their local library or whether that's humanitarian causes. And so I've had the pleasure of just meeting with folks who are really the millionaire next door, who are just regular folks like you and I, who are thrifty and have been careful in how they've spent their money, and are charitable and are really considering leaving something to a cause that is dear to them. And
What if
I've
somebody's interested, Mark? I know here, and I've done a lot of the same work you're doing, but
yes,
sometimes people don't know. So obviously, most communities have we have one called the San Diego Foundation.
sure,
And so it's this aggregate that basically says we divide the money up. We'll give some to the Red Cross.
yes,
We'll give some money over here. We'll give some money there and there. What
right,
is your take on that? Because I think a lot of times they don't maybe have one particular passion.
okay,
But if they went to a foundation like that, they could literally talk with somebody and get an insight as to what percentages would go where and where it might go and so on. Are you favorable of that kind of approach?
Of course. Yeah, I'm less familiar with the community foundations, but there are, across the country are foundations from, the Coastal Carolina Foundation in Charleston, to foundations in the San Diego area to, here in Fairfield County, Connecticut. My recommendation in terms of giving for folks that are charitable is to give locally and to give nationally or internationally. So whether that is to, a local, religious institution or a library or local food pantry, but then also to think more globally and to consider giving to, a global or national humanitarian group or environmental group or wherever your passion lies. And if you're having difficulty, there is that community foundation route, which you had mentioned as well.
Yeah, I think sometimes it sparks in people an interest to try and figure out what to do, right? And they learn from community foundations what is actually available to them. In other words,
Yeah.
right? It gives them an education to go and meet with somebody. Well, as far as the podcast is concerned, it sounds like you've got the growth. It's on the run. You've got a lot of different people. You're going to interview this gentleman from Florida and maybe a guy from Texas.
Yes.
You're now trying to secure. But Mark is saying, hey, look, if you have somebody, if you're listening to my podcast today, and you have somebody who has a unique interest or profile,
Right.
please send Mark an email and let him know about that. Also, for anyone who's listening to this, maybe you yourself have that unique story and you'd like to reach out to Mark to be on his podcast all across America. Mark, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, spending some time with me to just let the world know about all across America, about you as a person, the things that you're doing, your unique interests. I really appreciate you taking the time and the interest to do this. And I want to thank our good friend, Mike McCafferty, who I always look to the connectors because I am one of those people that puts over the years probably thousands of people together to do things.
That's
And you
wonderful.
never know what happens, right? And that is a bit of a unique talent, when you use your intuition to think, okay, this guy ought to talk to this guy and let's see what happens, right? So and offline here, I have a referral for you that I'm going to give you to a guy in upstate New York. So, all right. Well, blessings to you. Thank you very much. Namaste. Thanks for being on Inside Personal Growth. For everybody. Mark, tell me your other last name again, so I don't use the real last name.
Liotti, Marc Liotti.
Marc Liotti. Well, you're going to see when you go to his podcast, it's going to say Mark Vigliotti, but the reality is it's Marc Liotti is what he goes by. All across America, it's www.allacrossamerica.net, allacrossamerica.net. We'll put the entry in for that, or in other words, into our blog. And so all of you can reach him. Mark, thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you, Greg. And if I could leave you all with one thing is that, thank you for making all those connections, Greg, and bringing everybody on board. And, for me, just those personal connections and those relationships are so important. And I hope you reach out to friends and family members that you haven't talked to in a while, and just to check in and just to say hello. And, we always talk about that, how difficult it is to make friends, and, the easiest friends to make are the ones that you already have. So I'm sure there's somebody in your life, again, whether it's a brother or a sister or a cousin or, a friend from college, reach out and make that connection. And, it's so important that we have each other.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for saying that, actually, because it is important during times of pandemic or not, that we keep those relationships fresh and current. And I think over the years, depending on what it is you do for a living, most of us come in contact with a lot of people. A lot of people, and we don't really realize it until we put our hat on and start thinking about who we've actually spoken with or had an influence on or whatever. And the other other thing is, and remember this for my listeners, that the people that show up to your memorial when you pass, they've done this, a study of this, and I don't know where it is exactly, but it's pretty much predicated on the weather. So if it's a bad weather day, not as many people show up.
I thought you were going to have some great insight there, Greg.
So the reality is you might want to consider making those friends whether they show up to your memorial or not.
Right, right, right. Is that what we call a fair weather friend? Is that where that term comes from?
I think it might. I think it might. But if it's real stormy outside and they're having your memorial service on a snow day, you may not have as many people showing up.
And all the more reason to show up while we're living. So
exactly. That was my point. That's my point. Show up while you can. So thanks, Mark. Appreciate
thank you,
it.
Greg.